David Alcoholic, and I'm gratefully sober today since January 7th, 2019. And it has been quite a journey. Um, and it's been said in the program that, and we've lived it. It's a spiritual program. Um, my story is a whole lot of trying to do it without that. Let's see where it goes. Really, I could sum my story up with this quote: "I take beautiful things and turn them to ashes, and God takes ashes and turns them to beautiful things." That's really um, been my experience. It's been probably um, many of your experiences in this room here. Um, when I was young, I was raised wonderful family. I don't want to say religious; they were faithful. They wholeheartedly uh, embraced and lived their faith. Um, for me, it was foolish. We had a big family, 10 kids, and I would see my dad working 50, 60, 80 hours a week and then come in and thank the Lord for this food. And just, I mean, I got spanked every Sunday after church. It was just a whole bad deal. Um, and, but, and so I had decided very early on that, that I was just going to live my own life. But I was under the household of someone who was very, very faithful. And so that invited me to a double life. And much of my journey has been a double life. And living a double life, um, I had my fun and there was a lot of excitement to it, but it festers guilt, shame, remorse, um, and my first drink was at 14. Um, I told my dad that I had accepted the God as his understanding, Christ at the time, um, when I was 7. I had 7 years of not really being able to stand living in my own skin. Started that early. At 14, I had my first drink, my brother, and I finally understood why I was here, why I was created. I mean, it was magical, and uh, and I chased that feeling uh, until 7 years ago. And after that first drink, that first night, I blacked out. Blackout drinker from the very first moment I tasted alcohol, and I came to in my bed in a pool of blood. I didn't know how I got home. Car was in the driveway, um, and there was a lot of trouble. Um, the only thing I could think about was the next time I could drink. And so when you live in a tight run household, it takes a lot of lying and a lot of sneakiness to keep your addiction alive. And when I was 16, I bought my first car, my own money. I immediately moved out. Now I could live the life I wanted to live, and quickly spiraled out of control. Um, most of my life, my value came from you, from outside of me. Um, and the way I got you to like me was to buy you drugs and alcohol, to give myself away so that you would like me. If you didn't like me, um, or you didn't like something I said, um, it just had tremendous power over me. And the only way I could live under those constraints was to be intoxicated. Well, at 20, I decided, you know, I'm going to buy a bunch of friendship for a night. And I'd already been drinking and using other substances, and I drove across town and I bought 2 gallons of Jack Daniels, and I was on my way back, and it was raining. I don't remember really much of this, Apparently, I ran somebody off the road and they were chasing me, but I came up over a hill and down the other side, and it turned, and I went straight through someone's house, um, through their kitchen into their living room. It was a grandmother putting her grandchildren to bed. If they would have been downstairs, I would still be serving a sentence probably. Um, but can't say it was luck. Maybe it was God looking out for me. Um, maybe it was bad luck. But they didn't take any samples at the accident. It was only after I was in the hospital that they started to investigate that. And of course, records are all secret. So I dodged a bullet there. So I got out and I had a motorcycle. I was using my motorcycle to get back and forth to work. And on the way to work, I had my morning snuff and I drove into a pole. Um, no police, but went home and my parents, I had to stay with my parents because I was pretty banged up. But the police called. They said they found my glasses at the accident scene. So I thought, man, my luck is finally changing. So I got in my parents' car and I was driving to get my glasses and I totaled a dump truck. Rolled 6 times on Highway 22. Um, I wasn't drunk that time, but um, I wasn't sober either. Um, all this led to I finally had been beaten to the point where I didn't want to be breathing anymore. And I was in my little apartment, sitting on my bed, and I had my gun on my lap, and um, I was a coward. So the only way I could do it is I bought as much stuff as I could, and I did as much stuff as I could. And when it was starting to come down, I was going to take my life. And I was on my bed, and all this was swirling. My dad's words about God's love was swirling in my head. All the lies, all the shame, and I cried out to God on my bed that night. I said, God, if you are real, I need to know right now because I'm done. And I think that night is what you would call I had a burning bush experience. I had a very powerful spiritual experience that night. And it tremendously changed me. Um, and I immediately got involved in the church. And there was no doubt to me that God was real. One of the interesting shapings, and it wasn't anyone's fault, but the dynamic that came out of that is I'd always understood that God would be mighty and powerful, and I was to do God's work. And so I came out with this understanding that God loved me unconditionally as long as I did everything right all the time. And and that's just not a weight I could live under. It lasted a while. Um, I I was so zealous about the, the freedom I had suddenly experienced. It was like a light switch that I didn't crave alcohol or other substances. And so the only thing I knew to do at that time was to uh, well, you give your life to God, you become a missionary. And so I started knocking on uh, every mission organization's door I could think of. But they said you need a degree, and I just didn't know what I was going to do. So someone introduced me to a program for young adults. And, you can kind of go and teach English as a second language, um, and and it was fabulous. I sold everything I had because that's what the book of. But it said, sell everything you have and follow me. So I did that. I literally did that. And I ended up in Hong Kong with a number of other young adults. And I'm very fortunate to have been able to see the world, you know, many, many countries. But through all of it, there was this nagging within me um, of desperation, of loneliness, of fear of this higher power. Because it wasn't intentional, but I came away with the sense that I was always 5 minutes away from hell. Um, and it was it was good though. It was I was in service. I was seeing the world. I was able to stay sober through it. And I came back, and through that experience, I met a young woman who wanted to give her life to God as well in the same way. And so we were married, and um, I went to Bible school, and I know so much about God. They gave me a degree. So. Um, and but yet I was desperate. I would stand in the pulpit and preach about God's love, terrified that I wasn't going to make it. Um, and the other dynamic is again, all my value came from outside of me, and so if someone didn't like me, a conversation, it was exhausting. But I did pastoral ministry for 12 years, and it wasn't fake, and it wasn't all bad, but I was a desperate dry drunk. Because even though I had that spiritual experience, none of my symptoms, none of uh, my destitute was ever addressed. And and so it got to the end of my 12th year, and um, my wife at the time had gotten accepted at Princeton University. And excuse me, I'm going to grab some water. I forgot to bring it up. So finally, I was like, going to get a break from the spotlight, which meant taking a break from the church, which very quickly meant taking a break from God. And it was about 2 months before I had a drink in my hand. I was at a barbecue in New Jersey. Someone handed me a Mike's Hard Lime. I'd never heard of it before, but I drank it. I didn't get drunk. I didn't have any consequences. But the thing I noticed, it woke up that tape in my head. I forget how much fun it is to be drunk. I forget how much fun it is to be drunk. And that played over and over and over again. And came to a time when my wife took our kids to see her family, and I was able to accumulate enough alcohol to really get a buzz on it. And it was a magical night, let me tell you. I mean, it really was a wonderful reintroduction to being intoxicated. War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise was on. The internet was brand new, you know, and and I had a really romantic reintroduction to being intoxicated. And I instantly just started drinking exactly the way it was when I first had that when I was at the point where I cried out to God the first time. And I drank like that for several years. Um, I would hide stuff in the basement. We were in a three-story building, and I would find any reason I could to go down to the basement. And um, I remember one was like 4 in the morning, and I got up and I went down. And at this point I was an around the clock drinker. I would line tumblers up um, in the house, and I would get up, drink enough to pass out, get up, drink enough to pass out. Well, those tumblers were empty, so I went downstairs and I chugged a bunch of vodka, and I decided, you know what? I'm not going to live like I'm going to get healthy. So I decided to go for a jog. And right behind our apartment building was a canal. And so I started jogging, and I fell in that canal in November in Pennsylvania. And I couldn't move. Partially maybe it was the cold, but I was just so intoxicated that I couldn't move. And and I just kind of stood there in the water thinking, how could I get back here again? I said, God, help me. Help me to get free of this. And so maybe it was my power, maybe it was God's power, but I was able to eventually crawl to the shore. And I went into the basement, stripped down naked, threw everything in the washer, ran up 3 stories and totally naked to my apartment, and got dressed and made breakfast for everybody before they got up. Um, But my wife at the time started to notice that something wasn't quite right, and uh, and it really started to pull us apart. And I wanted to keep my family. One night I'd been drinking so much, so I got the idea that I wrote her a letter and I put it in her bed, and I texted my brother-in-law that I needed help, that I was drinking again, um, and then I passed out. When I woke up, I hadn't remembered that I'd done that. So, so there was a lot of trouble when I got up. Well, it was a lot of sorrow, I should say. There was a lot of sorrow. Um, and so, for the first time in my life, I decided to try AA. Um, at the college, uh, Angela was my wife's name. She knew some people that were in recovery, and they introduced me to my first AA meeting. And of course, I went to most of them drunk, um, but I did get the real sense that there was freedom available to me if I wanted it. And but eventually, I did get crushed by enough alcohol. It took a while, several months of still drinking and going to meetings drunk, that I really went to somebody and said, I really do need this to work. What do I need to do? Well, they said, first of all, don't come to meetings drunk. Um, get yourself a sponsor. Um, he said the steps are critical. Steps are the only way out of this. You're gonna need to do the steps. And so I did exactly that. I started going to meetings sober, and or I could stay sober 4 or 5 days before I would take a drink. And then he said, well, get yourself a big book, start doing the steps, and I started doing those things, and I could stay sober 18 days, 25 days, um, never quite make 90. And they said, well, you really just need to surrender. Um, this thing is a God thing. And I remember feeling so hopeless when I heard that, because I had been living for God as best I could all my life. Well, once I surrendered, I should say. In a sense, it felt like a death sentence. Um, and I didn't know what to do. But I said, well, God help me. And I started doing everything my sponsor told me to do. And I started to work the mechanics of the program with great earnestness. And incredibly, um, things got a lot better. But God was still there, and I was still I was still the worker. Um, my sponsor now said something that I wish I would have known back then. It took me a long time to figure out. It talks about no human power could save us. Um, it took me a long time to figure out that I was being a power. I've always been in the way of my own recovery. But anyway, over and over again, I would get some sobriety. Everybody would start to trust and get some hope in me, and then I'd drink again. I could not stay sober. Uh, Eventually, it came to the point where uh, Angela finished school and she was hired by Baylor University, and so we moved down here, and that was going to be my savior. Is a is a relocation, starting all over. Immediately got into AA down here. I went to Second Chance. I was in DePaul at the time, and just really immediately again got back to work. And I would just so fervently give myself to this program. I would read my big book. I would pray. I would empty the ashtrays. I would do whatever it was. I would do the work. Um, but for some reason, I could not stay sober. And Richard, I think he's still part of that group. One time he came to me and said, David, what's going on? I said, man, I just can't do this God thing. He said, I just can't trust God. He said, well, I guess you better get a new one. And that was revolutionary for me. because I was always taught you'd never question God. And I had done the steps a bunch of times. I'd done a fourth step a bunch of times, and I always felt so much better after I did the fourth step that I thought it was better. But I would always eventually end up back at a drink. And came to a point where I I was again at that place where I just didn't want to keep breathing. But I love my children. My ex-wife and I, she's now my ex-wife. We weren't doing so well, but I love my children so much that I wanted to stay alive. That was the only thing that was keeping me alive at the time. And and I just was so desperate. And so I changed groups, started over again, got a sponsor, did the steps again, and started doing everything that my sponsor would tell me to the best of my ability. And some of you were here where I was picking up desired chip twice a week sometimes. I just could not stay sober. And but um, eventually I had a breakthrough where someone said to me, um, you're just gonna have to trust this higher power thing. And I just didn't know that I could do it, but I said, all right, higher power, whoever you are, uh, I believe you. Because that's what the person said. They said you need to start with, even if you don't believe anything else, just tell yourself, pray, higher power, I believe you, and I believe you're on my side. And that's how I started. Um, and man, I got almost 2 years. Um, and my personal life had been falling apart, looked pretty from the outside, but um, there were two things that I'd never addressed in my fourth step. And that was my resentment towards God, and it's a spiritual program. And so if you have a resentment towards God, it's only going to be able to take you so far. And my wife at the time was a Princeton scholar, professor at Baylor. Like, I was always the problem. She thought that, and I thought that, and it mostly was true. Um, we we had become the perfect storm to destroy each other's soul, and the way she coped and the way I coped, we just spiraled further and further down. Um, and But I had almost 2 years, and I was really trying to hold on. And a number of things happened. Rick was a part of that. Um, I was helping another alcoholic. I was going to fix their car, and I decided to try Xanax for the first time while I was doing that, along with a lot of other things. Um, One of the things that I had been hired by TSTC. It was my dream job, but finally, that was going to save me. It's going to save our marriage. But of course, it didn't. I ended up buying drugs from one of my students, and alcohol returned. And once again, my whole life had fallen apart. Um, Apparently, I was working on that car, and I decided I was having an argument with my wife over the phone. So I decided I was going to go home, and we were going to argue in person. So I got in this person's car, and I went the wrong way. Apparently, I thought I was going to McGregor, but I was going to Hillsborough, and ended up wrecking that car and coming to in jail. And that was January 6, 2019. I say my sobriety date's January 7th because January 6th I was still quite intoxicated in jail. But I should say I came to in jail again. It was not the first time. And I laid there in the bed, um, barely knowing who I was, but I knew that it was finally over. Nobody was coming to get me. Everything was gone. And for the first time in my life, I was able to surrender. I didn't have any more ideas about God. I didn't have any more ideas about AA. I just lay there, and I don't know what's surrender. You lay there and squeeze your chest. I don't know, but something broke in me. I was beaten to the point where I could finally say that if I'm involved, it's just not going to work. And I was able to surrender in that bed that night. And January 7th, I started an incredible journey of um, we come to IA to quit drinking, and that is that's the greatest gift. But we're also invited to a life that's greater than we could have ever imagined for ourselves. Um, well, I laid in that jail cell, and I thought I better get comfortable because I'm going to be here a long time. And then the next day, from behind me, I heard David Reed all the way out. And I was laying there, and they're like, "Hey, man, that's you. You're out. Somebody came to get you." And I couldn't believe it. Who was going to come for me? And I did find out later that my wife at the time came and picked me up, but uh, it was my mother-in-law that gave her the money to come get me. She was not going to come get me. She said, "I don't care what you do after that, but you go get him." And so she picked me up, and ultimately she dropped me off at the Triangle. I had nowhere else to go, and pretty. I was looking for that gun to put in my mouth, and a very critical thing happened. I was in the back parking lot here, and so many of you had already got to know me and loved me and were cheering for me. And one came up to me, and this is a real turning point. He said, "David, do you have another get up in you?" And I really didn't know. I really didn't know. And he said to me, well, "Why don't you take a step and let the rest of us carry you?" And he became my sponsor that day. And Wino and LeMay literally saved my life. Um, they took me into their home. When I was like, "Time to brush your teeth." I mean, I was that far gone. I didn't, I just had no life skills left. And slowly they helped me put my life back together, get my, get a job. It was, looking back, it was a terrible job, but it was a job. Um, and I could slowly rebuild. And um, that's, that's really the power of the program, one alcoholic with another. But through that surrender and the whole triangle came around me. It wasn't just one little bit, but they were most critical. They literally took me into their home and fed me and got me going. Um, but it's amazing what will happen when spirituality becomes genuine. I was a pastor for 12 years, but I really began my first spiritual, genuine spiritual life laying in that jail cell on January 7th, on January 6th. And yeah, Wino and LeMay helped me to grow to the point that uh, they turned me over to Rick. And Rick's carried me into a new life of freedom, um, uh, understanding, and there really isn't words that can describe the the power of we. Ultimately, I'd learned for myself that the spiritual has to be real and true because the mechanics, the fellowship, the meetings, they didn't keep me sober. But combined with the power of higher power, um, it truly becomes a life that's worth living, a life that is greater than you ever could have imagined for yourselves. We were very, very successful. We had such a beautiful life, on the outside, but uh, it was quite destitute inside. And I can only describe kind of what happened to me as when I reflect on those times that I just couldn't stay sober. Um, the big book says that in each and every one of us, there's an understanding of that we belong to God. Um, in the faith of my parents, they talk about a God-shaped hole in our heart that only God can fit in, and that's where the sunlight of the Spirit rests. I've come to discover that for myself, and without that, um, I just I can't do it on my. I sure don't have the power to stay away from alcohol. But all that shame and that anger and the guilt and the resentment filled that hole, and that was the beauty of the steps. Is particularly the fourth and the fifth is that it it slowly pulls those pieces out and allows a place for God to rest. Um, Higher power, if that's your comfortable language, and uh, and that was really where, um, again, I could stay and genuinely mean it is. Now I know why I'm here. I'm here to have a relationship with my higher power and with you, great people, and uh, to not to be a power, but to do God's work well. Some really critical things that have come out of sobriety, besides not being able to pick up a drink for 5 minutes, um, is I learned how to, to be alone. Um, you're all important to me, and I love all of you, but my value no longer comes from what you think about me. Um, that changed my life as much as putting down a drink. Um, Peace and serenity. That's the ability for me now to be able to live in my own skin without a drink. Um, and and I protect that as much as I protect myself from the first drink. Um, it's funny when for a long time I could slide into really sick thinking. Sorry, sick thinking because it's just how I always thought. Now I can tell, and it's still got to have a sponsor because I really need help. But when something starts to rattle that serenity, I know I need to get to work quick because I just really can't stand to live like that anymore. Um, so intrinsic value, I mean, I don't, not anything special, but in God's economy, I have infinite value. And that's been critical. And yeah, freedom from fear. I'm human, of course, I have fears, but uh, fear manifests itself in manipulation for me, manipulation and anger and, and yeah, particularly anger. Anger makes me feel righteous and powerful, and I'm neither. Um, all it does is um, put people's names on my fourth step, and uh, and so that's been one of the great gifts. Um, I mentioned before balance in relationships. I am engaged to a wonderful woman, but who I am doesn't come from her or from you. It comes from God dwelling within me. Each one of us, man. The creator of everything wants to dwell within us. That's gotta that's gotta lift you up by your bootstraps. At least it did me. Um, and so my kids are back in my life. I have some I have some things that I like. I have some things that I need. We need shelter. We need food. We need all those things. But I can honestly say they're important. But um, if they were taken away, um, I think I would really be okay. we're invited often to do a gratitude list in AA, and one of my sponsors, I had a few, I had a few, um, invited me. I want you to do that backwards. I want you to make the list as short as possible, um, because at any moment, all those things that you're grateful for can be taken away from you. And it helped me to understand that sobriety has to be unconditional. Has to be unconditional, at least for me. Um, and yeah, it is a life that's greater than I could have imagined for myself. And my sponsor says these are the good old days right now. The best days are still ahead of us. I think he's pulled that from some readings as well, but it's very true. Um, and so, what I'd say I'd like to leave you with is um, AA, and it's talked about being a one pony, you know, I forgot, one pony trick, one trick pony or whatever. We get sober, but that is the beginning. We get a life that's worth living, and so if you're here tonight and you're working on getting sober, if you're here tonight and you're wondering if you want to stay sober, whatever it is, financial insecurity, whatever it is, the question does continue to reign: is do you have one more get up in you? Um, and together, um, great people like you, good sponsorship, and a higher power. There isn't anything, but there's very few things that can't be overcome together. And so I'm just really grateful to be sober today. I'm grateful to have a God of my understanding that has given me this new life, and I'm really thankful for all of you. Uh, my name's David. I'm alcoholic.